Hello and welcome to Practical Christian Lessons, and we are in the NIV Archaeological Study Bible today, and we are looking at some proof that the priesthood was not a late development in Israel. Let's get into it. So, something we're going to be skipping over really quick. If you're new to this series, I never pull it out of my closet. This series is sort of based on the idea of John Oswald's book, The Bible Among the Myths. We're examining the theology of Israel in the Old Testament when they're the Hebrews and later the Israelites, and showing how it is so different and has such stark contrast to their neighbors that it can't have just been a development of theology from their neighbors. It had to be something unique. However you account for it, I'm going to say divine revelation. But if you're not, go through this series if you're a skeptic. Listen to the things I've been talking about, going through these essays, look at the sources that's been brought up here, read John Oswald's book, see what you make of that argument, right? How are you going to account where the Hebrews and the Israelites came from? Because if there's no natural explanation that makes sense, then you're left with the supernatural. Source steal from Sherlock Holmes. Once you've eliminated the possible, all that's left is the impossible. However that old Sherlock Holmes quote goes. We are skipping over several essays in this. Not that they're not interesting, they just don't relate to this topic. One we are skipping over, I just wanted to note, is the Ketef Hinnom Amulets, where there were some amulets with parts of numbers 6 in them found, and they were found in the late 7th century, so late 800s BC, so moving further. Moving backwards. So not starts at 0 and then goes backwards, not 0 counting forward like we have now. So just want to note that because that's one of the clear evidences they point to in this of being like, hey, that means that the Hebrew scriptures we have clearly have written foundations before the 7th century. So that proves a big problem for up to that point, right? Those were found in 1979. Quite a few skeptical arguments people were using. And some still used today despite evidence like this that clearly contradicts them. This essay is on the Hittite instruction for priest on Numbers 8. Again, this doesn't necessarily tie directly into our series in the normal sense, but this is important to demonstrate. One thing critics will say is that the priesthood was a development, and that's how you get in the documentary hypothesis things like the P source, right, the made-up documentary hypothesis, where there was later revisers, not those who edited the text and put together the ancient manuscripts, but changed older texts. That's a fundamental part of the documentary hypothesis by skeptics. Well, this kind of knocks a big problem in that, because if the priesthood's not a development, then this theory has no ground to stand on. Numbers 8, page 208 for this essay. And if you do want to get this study Bible, it's important you get the archaeological study Bible and not the archaeology one. This one's out of print, so it might be a little bit more expensive. Numbers 8. Several copies of a Hittite text outlining the instructions for priest and temple personnel are currently housed in Turkish collections. Dating prior to the time of the Hittite king Suppiluliuma I, the text details these temple officials' proper appearance and conduct during the performance of their duty. And that is a text from 1350 to 1325 BC, so quite old. A few instructions nearly parallel the biblical rules for priests and Levites. Again, I want to hammer how important it is, the dating on that, and then the priesthood of Israel. If that is the accurate dating of how old these are, a lot of the ideas in the documentary hypothesis suddenly don't make a lot of sense. Hittite temple kitchen attendants were to trim their hair and fingernails and dress in clean garments. The house in which the sacred bread was baked was to be swept clean, and no pigs or dogs, animals that were considered filthy in antiquity, were allowed in that house. Similarly, the biblical consecration ritual for the Levites required them to shave their entire bodies and wash their clothes to symbolize their absolute ritual purity before God. Numbers 8:7. Further, the Israelite priest was to maintain clean and well coiffed hair, and to refrain from tearing his clothes in mourning because he had been dedicated with the anointing oil of the Lord. Although Hittite temple servants received a daily allowance of foodstuffs for themselves and their families, if a servant were to siphon extra wine or steal a portion or any item intended for sacrifice, he was to be put to death. Likewise, if such a servant were to pilfer a temple treasure, or any other article designated for the god's use, he and his entire family were to be killed. In Israel, Levites too received daily allowances from their congregation's sacrifices, and it lists quite a few passages to see that in Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Yet Eli's wicked sons selected the choicest portions of meat before the sacrifice was properly divided, thereby incurring God's wrath, such as in 1 Samuel 2, just 1 Samuel 2. And just as the Hittites were warned, under punishment of death, not to steal from the gods, Achan and his family members were stoned to death because he retained some plunder that was to have been devoted to the Lord, such as in Joshua 7. Hittite priests were to conduct designated feasts at their appointed times, using the requisite number of animals and or other food supplies. Similarly, God instructed Moses regarding the observance of specific feasts at particular times throughout the year. And those feasts, there's actually a nice essay on those in the portion that we skipped over between the last essay and this one. Hittite farmers and herdsmen were to bring the first fruits of their crops and herds to the temple. If they attempted to cheat the gods by withholding the best produce or highest quality fatted animals for themselves, they were severely punished, and often by their own deaths and those of their entire families. Likewise, the Israelites were to donate the first fruits of their harvest to the Lord. The firstborn of man and beast were to be redeemed, in a sense purchased back through sacrifice, in recognition that God provided for and sustained them. Again, citing places in Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, as well as Nehemiah here. The fact that priestly stipulations in effect during the time of Moses, Eli, and Samuel had contemporary parallels among the Hittites is important because such commonality undermines the widely accepted theory that the biblical priestly code is a very late work that could not have originated during the time of Moses. And as we've got an essay we read through on the documentary hypothesis, and again want to hammer home here, that completely undermines their theory of a priestly revision later. Not that it's not technically possible, because a lot of things are technically possible. It makes no sense. It is nonsense. That's what the documentary hypothesis is. So, hopefully, a good essay for you guys to enjoy and read there. Let's put this right here. But that's it. I just really want to note, right, the antiquity of a lot of these things really fly in the face of a lot of skepticism people want to offer. Now, one thing I want to always tell people who are skeptical, right, you still don't have to be a Christian while acknowledging these things. You can reject the documentary hypothesis. You can reject a lot of just the bad scholarship, false charges, and nonsensical claims, and still reject Christianity. You just can. No one's out here forcing you to be a Christian in some way, and even though I would say that Christianity makes the most logical sense of how all the evidences of history, archaeology, the world itself, and supernatural events that are not explained by normal natural reasoning, you can still reject those things. And no one's twisting your arm here. You don't have to make up claims. You don't have to buy into a lot of these skeptical claims, right? How do you account for these things, right? Do we have people who are like, oh yeah, priests later came and revised these things. That's why there's this priestly language later. Well, how do you then explain this parallel here? How do you explain having that amulet that was found in the 800s? Hi, just making a quick edit here. I realize a slight mistake I made yesterday. I think my case, the important parts of it still stand strong, and I just forgot to say where my brain went. In this, when I'm talking about the amulets, I say the 800s. It's right, it's the late 7th century. My brain just got mixed up. That's the 600s. As far as 600 generally is when the dating of those amulets is. My brain was like, that means we can reliably push a written manuscript of those past to the 800s, right? That's just how oral cultures work. Not going to get into that here in this video. That's its own entire conversation. But even if that's not true, just a quick objection I'd want to get in here is if people would then say, oh, Josiah still could have reinvented it. Okay, he's born at latest 648. So, somewhere in 48 years, he goes around, revises not just some, but all of the numbers manuscripts. So those are what's popping up in the amulets we find in the 600, which have then be based on older things. To say it's technically possible, just like the thing earlier in this video, yes, it is technically possible, but to say it is highly improbable, if not absurd, to try and make that as an actual argument with any serious historical grounding on the grounds of speculation, because there's no evidence this actually happened. There is zero evidence this actually happened. Just absurdity. I just want to point that out there. So I think my case still stands strong. I just wanted to put this edit in here instead of re-recording the whole thing, because one, I think the video is still good, but two, it's just important to show you guys that people make mistakes, and it's okay. Admit when you were wrong, like I was yesterday. I still think my case has its strong points, and just correct the points where I was wrong. You guys have a wonderful day. 7th century BC. And that has scripture in it, which means that Numbers, by the time of the 800s, was being written. That's not too long after the Exodus, as far as ancient world writing goes. And that also means there's older manuscripts than what they found, because it's based on something that existed, whether that's oral or written. Like, you can't just deny those things. So, and yeah, if you really, really want to be skeptical and be like, oh, that's just that one part of Numbers. Sure. But I have no reason and no evidence to actually suggest that any of the other text in Numbers or older, because the Pentateuch's been taken as a collective text for a long time, there is no real evidence to suggest that those had major revisions that changed their actual meaning, and not just editorial updates and people who put them together into one book. Editorial work, not revision. There's no real evidence for that. And I know some people want to point to Josiah. Like, here, let me look up the accepted dating of King Josiah, because he's an accepted historical figure. Many people will point to him as being the one who revised older text. And here, people don't debate this part. He was born in 648, and then his death date his birthday is a little disputed. He was born in 648 is generally one exception. Some people argue as late as 640, right? But that's like an 8-year difference. Still the 600s, and yet we have this text from Numbers and these priestly codes that date back to the 800s and the 1300s. So we have texts that well predate his life, and yet we're going to say he's revising these things that already existed. And then again, as I've posed in this series, you still have to answer the question, where does he get these ideas from? If you're going to assume, without any real evidence, that he's the one who revised these things, or his priesthood, or whatever you want to say, where did they get the ideas from? All you've done is kick the problem back a step. You didn't actually prove anything. And a lot of these arguments come from speculation and presuppositions, but as I believe it's Douglas Michael, one of the Michaels, who says that speculation is not an argument. It's just speculation. It doesn't actually prove anything. So that's my challenge to anyone who's a skeptic. This is a big apologetic tool I want to give anyone here who's a Christian listening to this, and an open invitation to discussion and seeking truth. And if you want to continue these type of discussions and conversations, feel free to join my server down in the doobly-doo below. You're welcome to ask questions, talk to me there, and seek community. You guys have a wonderful day. God bless.